Today we're going to take a look at for loops. For loops contain three different components: the init expression, the conditional expression, and also the third component is summarized here on Microsoft website here, the loop expression. In this case of this example here, the loop expression won't change much. And then we're going to take a look at nested loops, where one loop is inside of another, and we're going to play around with actually modifying the inner loop so that its conditional expression is dependent upon a variable controlled by the outer loop. And in the process, we'll also take a look at some complex conditional statements that give us some interesting behavior. Okay, so let's take a look here. I have the sample program here that we have our main here, and we have some variables here, so total columns here, and then we also have columns. So total columns represents total columns, and I initialize it to 0 here. Now down here I assign it the value of 6, and then we have a simple for loop here, our initialization expression, our conditional expression here, and our loop expression. You can see here the loop expression just advances the value of column by 1, or increments it by 1 each time. And the column variable is initialized to 0 here, and every single time the for loop executes, it will output an asterisk. And after the for loop completes, you'll see that it outputs a new line. So let's go ahead and run this here. And as expected here, our loop here, we had a total number of columns of 6, and what happens here is we get 6 asterisks in a row. Relatively straightforward there. Okay, so what if we wanted to do 6 of these rows here? So we have 6 stars here, so 6 columns, and we want to stack them on top of each other. Well, let's take a look at the initial approach here. What if I just take that for loop that I did there, and now I'm going to actually copy paste it 6 different times. Okay, so in this case here I have for the first row of stars here, or first row of asterisks, do my new line here, copy it a second time here, and then do my new line once again, a third time here, new line again, fourth time here, and then a fifth time here, and then a sixth time. Okay, so there we go. Let's run it, and if we expect, we should get a like a rectangle of asterisks. Sure enough, as you can see here, we get this rectangle of asterisk, lines up just like our program as expected. Okay, so that's interesting, but we have a problem here. Well, or maybe not a problem, but it's not very effective programming. I mean, we just copy pasted this here. What if we just said, how about we execute this loop 6 different times? So voila, here we go. Now we get to our first case of nested loops here. Now you notice in this case here, in my initial program I had columns here. Now I've added another variable called total rows here. Okay, and all the variables here, when I declare them, I assign them to an initial value of 0 here. Later on, I'm actually assigning the total rows, so that means the total rows and the total columns, to 6. So I'm expecting to get a 6 by 6 grid here. Now let's take a look here at our initialization expression here. We're starting the outer loop here, so it's going row equals 0. So the first row will be 0, and then the inner loop is going to control the output of the columns. That's what we saw before. We had our first loop there that was in our program last. Let's skip back to program number 2, and now we see this here, this loop now is contained within a nested loop structure here. Okay, so here we have on the conditional expression here, we have the outer loop goes for total number of rows. So the loop will stop once the value of row reaches is equals or greater than total rows. Each time the loop executes, this row plus plus adds a number to the variable row. Okay, so as expected, we should see a rectangular grid of asterisks. Go ahead and run it. Oh, what happened here? We got here, it doesn't look like a grid of asterisks here. It looks like we got a just one big long row. So what happened? Okay, well, we outputted here, this here, but we notice here that on the previous program, we also did our end of line there. So where do we put that? Well, now let's go ahead and skip to this here, program number 4. Aha. Um, let's see here. Well, let's go back to program number 3 and let's fix that there. Okay. All right. So C out here. Now we're going to add in an endl here. Okay. So that's going to produce that end of line. So each time this inner loop executes after it's done, we have that end of line there. Okay. So let's go ahead and compile it. Compiles. And we run it. Aha. There we go. We get now our expected rectangle. Now the font on this here is it doesn't quite line up, or it looks a little bit like a rectangle more than a square, but this is 6 rows here and 6 columns. So 1 column here, 2 column, 3 column, 4 column, 5 column, 6 column, and then the rows. All right, so close that there. Now let's take a look here at program number 4. Okay, this is where we get in, and what happens is that we want to actually produce a some spaces. So, but it's going to actually, so if you notice here, each row, if you look at first row is row 0, and then on the inner loop here, we're going to do a number of spaces for the first row. So first row is 0, we should get 0 spaces. Second row is row 1, we should get 1 space, and so you'll see a diagonal right triangle. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it here. Voila, there we go. We got 0 spaces on the first row, 1 space on the second row, 2 spaces on the third row, all the way down here. So now we have this triangle here that we have 2 loops, and so you notice here that this first loop here, it outputted to the number of row that produces spaces, and then the second loop here produced the stars. Now you notice here the value of column went to row, and the second loop it went to total columns here based upon this conditional statement here. And each one here, we have the column is initialized in the first one to the value of 0. The second inner loop here is initialized to the row, which turns out to be on that diagonal there. And at the same time, we have our new line after we produce this each row. So, all right, let's take a look at program number 5. All right, in program number 5, now what we're doing here is we're saying that, I don't know what we're doing. Looks like we did the same thing. Oh, yeah, it is the same thing, you know that? Looks like I saved the same program twice. There was 2 steps I had here. All right, well, let's go ahead and look at number 6. All right, at number 6 here, what we do here is we say, okay, we have a series of spaces here, put in a star, and now what we're going to say here is put in another series of spaces until we reach that one. So now we got the diagonal, and in this case here, we just said put in that 1 star. So each row contains 1 star. It's just position 1 over to the right each time. And that's what happens here is this produces the spaces to the left, this puts in the star, and this produces the spaces to the right. Now you may be wondering, why would I ever put spaces to the right? The screen's blank anyway. Well, it just sort of illustrates that how many spaces we're going to put in. We're going to actually leverage that here in a little bit. So this space here at the end, and then each line we get a new line here. Go ahead and run it. Sure enough, we get this right diagonal here. First line, there's no spaces before, then we have all these spaces here at the end. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, now number 7 here, what we're going to do is we're going to actually do this thing here. We're going to put a space, we're going to put in the number of spaces at the beginning, and then what happens now is we're going to say, we're going to, remember I said we're going to add in the extra spaces? Well, now I'm going to double the number of spaces, and so So this way what happens is that, and subtract on each row. So this is going to produce this like V effect here, okay? So, and then we'll put in yet another star. So let's go ahead and run this here. Haha, check that out. It's like a mirror image of each one here. So we started with 0 spaces to the left, the star, and then we doubled the number of spaces. So last time I said, oh, we're putting these spaces to the right here. Now we have these spaces here. So now you can see that this is the double number of spaces here. This is yet again the spaces, but this is minus the row here. So it's going to shift it in closer together. Okay, we'll just shift it to the right. Then there's one less space here compared up above, and we have this V effect here. Okay, so now let's take a look here. But we really want a V that is an isosceles triangle that has one star at the top. Okay, so now we're going to say here, if we have almost the same exact thing here, we did a little bit of manipulation on the conditional expression here. So once again, you see this column is less than total column. So this expression here gets valued to the right, and then it gets compared to this column. So if you're thinking of the, it's like almost putting a pair of parentheses around this here. So if I put a parenthesis there and a parenthesis there, this gets evaluated and the comparison happens. So the loop stops when this is false here. So in this case here, we have, okay, do we want to put the star? Because really we only want to put one star at the very bottom there on our V. Okay, and this says here, if the row is equal to the total rows minus 1, because it happened we started the first row at 0, and in this case here, the last row is going to be the total number of rows, which are 6. It's going to be actually row number 5, which is 6 minus 1. So go ahead and run it here. Sure enough, now we get our V. Voila, there we go.